Hi, and welcome to Dark Window. I'm your host, Jim Mann. Here on this program, I will be talking with many of the leading investigators, researchers, and authors on the topics of UFOs, UAPs, alien abductions, extraterrestrials, and a host of many other fascinating and related topics. So please join me and my guest for the next hour as we reach out. This is Dark Window on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jim Mann, your host, and this is Dark Window. Today, I have a special guest in the studio with me. His name is Dr. Robert Farrell. I've known Dr. Farrell for quite a number of years. He's a fascinating gentleman. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. He has a master's degree in Business Administration, and he has a Doctor of Engineering. He spent 15 years as a professor of engineering at Penn State University. Now, Dr. Farrell has had a very keen interest in the UFO phenomena for, well, most of his life. And he has done extensive research and study himself throughout the years. And so please join me as we welcome Dr. Robert Farrell. And Bob, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Jim. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, and I'm so happy to have you with us here on the show. I've got this new book in my hand that you gave me a couple of weeks ago, The Science Behind Alien Encounters. Patricia and I, my program manager, who is behind the scenes here, plopping up all the slides, and she's been reading it, and I've read a little bit of it, and we've been looking at a few documentaries online regarding some of the stuff that's in this book. This book is filled with all sorts of fun stuff and very interesting. But what I want to talk about today is Chapter 16, the Nazca mummies. And you're involved in that a little bit. And I know you have a presentation here that you'd like to share with us.
Yes.
So if we can get that presentation up, there it is.
Okay, there it is.
And so, Dr. Farrell, what can you tell me, or how could we start off this conversation about the Nazca mummies? I almost said Nazca dummies.
Well, what I can tell you is how I got drawn into it.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I happened to be attending. That's this slide kind of indicates where I started in this whole thing. I was attending a Starworks USA 2017. It's run by Paula Harris in Nevada, and Jaime Maussan was giving a presentation, which was the first time actually in the United States that anyone had heard anything at all about what they would refer to as mummies that they had found out in Peru, and actually they weren't mummies. So let me just. They're actually bodies because they still had all their organs. And the thing that really piqued my interest was the fact that there's two species, and both species are bipedal and tridactyl. And the tridactyl got my attention because I started counting, if you're tridactyl, how many digits do you have? And it turns out you have 12. And I had done quite a bit of research into the Sumerian culture in preparation for my book, The Science Behind Noah's Flood. And I knew 12 was a very significant and important number for the Sumerians. And so I was trying to connect with these bodies. Did they represent perhaps the Anunnaki that the Sumerians believed had come to Earth about 450,000 years ago? And maybe that's why the Sumerians thought so highly of 12, is because their gods, or whatever you call them, had 12 digits. And so that hooked me right there. That got me involved. And so I was always trying to connect with, let me see if there we go. And the Sumerians, turns out, have other connections that appear to be Sumerian. And what I'm showing in this picture right here is a bull that was dated to be over 5,000 years ago. It was found in Bolivia, and it had been used.
Yeah, excuse me.
Yes.
That is a fascinating point because that is cuneiform, correct?
Yes, it's a form of cuniform,
And
which
it's
was
and it was
invented by
found
the
in
Sumerians.
Peru.
No, actually, it was found in Bolivia, right next door.
Okay, Bolivia.
Yeah, but it
But it
was
was
a farmer had been using it to water his goats. So he didn't recognize it. I don't know how someone discovered, hey, look at that's pretty important. Look at the writing. Anyway, so it turns out that a lot of people make this the bull connection with the Sumerians, even though it was supposedly 5,000 years old. Before we had airplanes and things to fly back and forth and establish a connection. So that kind of reinforces, in my mind anyway, that there may be a connection between Peru and Bolivia too, and Samaria, and
thousands
so
of miles apart.
thousands of miles apart. And so I actually approached Jaime and asked him if I could kind of tag along, drop in from time to time on the phone, call him and see what's going on with these bodies. And he also gave me permission to use a lot of the images that he had in his presentation. So you'll see those today. But so the discovery of these bodies actually began, they were discovered in 2015 and by grave robbers. And they, I think, sat on it for a while trying to figure out what to do. Normally, grave robbing is illegal. It still is in Peru. It's a lucrative business, but if you get caught, you could go to prison. And so they weren't sure what to do, I guess, and they brought some bodies or parts of the bodies to Thierry Jamin, who ran the Archaeological Institute in Cusco. And they brought it to him, asking him how, whether he thought they were real. And here's the story right here. They didn't bring him to him until October of 2016, even though they discovered him in 2015. And Mario was the pseudo name. That's not his real name, but he was a Carol. And he brought him to Theory to find out if they were real. And Mario, indeed, Theory did examine them. And after examining them, thought, yes, they are real. In fact, probably historic. So he had to do two things in his mind. Number one, he wanted to try and get the scientific community involved in these bodies. So he posted some of the images on the internet, hoping that someone would bite and connect. And the other thing he did in January of that year, because he didn't want to be caught with these bodies and go to prison for smuggling or having stuff that was taken out of a grave, supposedly. So he even wrote a letter to the Ministry of Culture claiming that he had these bodies in his possession and that where they had been found near Nazca. And he thought they were probably a national treasury, and he wanted them to be declared as a national treasury so that they'd be protected, not only from the environment, but from being sold off to some collectors. There are wealthy collectors on this planet that might swoop in and buy some of these things for their own collection, and then they wouldn't be available to do research. So that was what Theory was trying to do. And I guess no one seemed to be interested. Certainly the archaeologists in Peru had been turned off on the whole project. They had been made to believe that these bodies were fake, that they were assembled from cadaver bones, and they wanted nothing to do with it. And so I think that was a deliberate effort by the Ministry of Culture to taint this whole thing, to discourage people from wanting to spend millions of dollars or whatever to buy any of these things because they were fake. And anyway, it turns out that what happened, that I'm not going to read this exactly the way it's written, but there was a biologist. In fact, I don't really know who he is for sure, but I think he was the biologist that came with Jaime when they came down in April to Peru. But he had seen those on the internet, and he contacted Jaime. He knew he was a good friend with Jaime, and said, it appears as though those might be real. You really should take a look at it. And so what Jaime did was contact Theory, and by either internet or phone, and through discussions was convinced that yes, there may be something here. And so he then contacted Gaia, and some of you may know who Gaia is, but Gaia agreed that yes, it looks like they might be important, and they agreed to help fund a task force, if you would, of investigators, a lot of which scientists, to go down and look at these bodies. And so they did. So here's the people that were on the team. And I have a complete list with me if one has a question on that. But it was a cross cut of a lot of people who might be important to see these bodies firsthand. And biologist, of course, was there. There was a surgeon and a radiologist, an archaeologist, a forensics expert, some videographers, and other journalists were there too. And they came from all over. And not all the people who ultimately did the investigation for this whole period of a couple of years it's going to take to go through all this, but they didn't all go to Peru. So some contributed from their own location, like in the United States or France even, where samples would be sent to them or pictures would be sent to them. And so that's how they contributed. But
excuse me, the gentleman from Russia, the scientist from Russia, he went down to Peru, correct?
Yes, Dr. Korotkov was one of the first team, went down with the first team.
That is that's quite a team they've assembled there, quite a diverse bunch of folks.
It was, yes. And even Canada did not. That work was done in Canada. So samples were sent to him, and they did some of the DNA work. But there were the people that actually went there were, the biologist and Jaime from Mexico. In fact, I have my list here. But let's see who else. Also there was a. Let's see here. The one of the other people that was there was excuse me, Dr. Benitez, Dr. Benitez, who happened to be a forensics expert for the Mexican Navy, and so he was an important part of the team to do an initial survey of the bodies, and what he thought. This is before they had X-rays, initially just looking at the bodies as they were, and the bodies were coated in this white substance, which turned out to be diatomaceous earth, and apparently it had been blended with some oil so it would stick to the body.
That was an interesting aspect, is that these skeletons, these mummies, they were more or less mummified in this diatomaceous earth. They were preserved because diatomaceous earth is also a desiccant, and
yes,
and it's used for a lot of things, including swimming pool filters. And
it's a fungicide too.
Yeah, fungicide.
So it's an excellent way to preserve the bodies, and the bodies were not actually mummified. They were referred to as mummies earlier on, but even on the first lecture that Jaime gave that I saw, he was clear to say that these weren't mummies because they did not contain any of the internal organs. Therefore, the government had no right to claim that they had robbed a grave, because that would not, you don't want to do that. So
yeah, right.
So they're not. They're just the bodies. They're dead people that used to live. So they're not mummies, and that kind of put that to bed anyway.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes I refer to them as the mummies just because everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say that.
Right. Yes.
So let me just go to the next slide here. So the initial story, as far as where they were found, of course, the grave robbers really never did, as far as I know, reveal really where they found them for obvious reasons, because apparently there were more, and they were worth a lot of money. But the first story that they told Theory was that they had been exploring a grave and somehow found themselves in a stairway going down into the ground. And when they got to the bottom of the stairs, they saw a door, and they pried the door open, and they found themselves in a room. And there were sarcophagi, and they they looked in the sarcophagi and they found these bodies. So that was the story that they gave. That's how they came about the bodies. Later on, they had to change their story, and I think it was maybe a couple years later before they actually agreed to take some of the members of the team out to where they now claim that they found the bodies. And it was in a rugged area. You can see that they had to climb a mountain to get to
that's pretty rugged.
It turned out it was basically a cave. And here's a picture looking inside the cave.
Right.
You can see the hand there. It's got the white powder on it. So what was explained to them while they were in this cave was each of the areas that appeared to be carved out or something where there could have been a body in there. And so that was all pointed out to them. Well, this is where we found this body, and over here is where we found this body. And so certainly it didn't fit the image that they were initially given as far as being a tomb.
Yeah, right.
But
of course, this was all filled with that diatomaceous earth.
Yes. So it kind of matched. And also some of the researchers said that, well, it smelled in here just like in the cave. It smelled the same as what they were smelling when they handled the bodies.
Correct. Yeah.
So that kind of connected it. So in Cusco, the first meeting was April of 2017. And the team was actually shown certain bodies initially. And one of them, first ones that they showed them were hands. Here I have a picture of the hands, which are unusual. You can see they're tridactyl and very long. And now, if you look at your finger, you can see you've got three bones, more or less. And these guys have, and they call them phalanges.
Phalanges.
These hands and also the bodies, I shouldn't say that. The bodies don't all have 5 phalanges. But these hands were 5 phalanges and almost 12 inches long. So you can imagine how long your hand would look if it was 12 inches.
Dr. Farrell, what do we know about this metal part here?
Yeah, well, that they didn't know for sure what it was until they had an analysis done on it. But one of the things they did know right off the bat was it was non-magnetic and appeared like it might be copper. And indeed, the final analysis on that was that it was a mixture that included copper, and it appeared to be something that could have been done by people in that part of the country or that world that back, let's say, a couple thousand years ago. They would have had the technology to make that, whatever you want to call that thing. Mm-hmm. So I think they're still trying to figure out exactly what the purpose is.
Was that sort of an implant inside?
Yeah. It was right, implanted right in the skin.
Okay.
Right on top of the hand. All there was 2 of them, and each one was a little different color. So I think one was a little more reddish, and one was gold colored. So here you can see there's 3 hands there, and the one closest had a chunk taken out of it. And of course, that was done so they have stuff to send off for an analysis. But these have been X-rayed and looked at. I don't know about computer tomography, but they've certainly been looked at through X-ray. And here is an artist. There was a graphic designer, Jose Hernandez, who did a good job of, and you'll see when we look at the other bodies, eventually toward the end of the talk, I will show you what his interpretation of the bodies would be if they were living, and this is a good picture here because it shows how you don't need to have a thumb to grab onto something. When you can wrap your hand with all those fingers, you can wrap right around it with your fingers.
That's a very good point because I thought about that when I saw that.
Yeah.
But with all the phalanges they got, they can just grip something. They don't need they don't need the opposing thumb.
That's right. And, when I was growing up in school, I don't know what point, maybe high school or biology, that was supposed to be a feature of an intelligent being, one that has and opposing thumbs so that they could make things, make tools. And so that kind of shoots that theory.
Absolutely.
They also were presented with some heads. And my first reaction when I saw those was that they were monkey heads. They look like they might have come off a monkey. But when they inspected them, they noticed that the connection on the bottom was a square hole, which is very unusual because most animals, it's a round hole for the nerves and everything to pass down. So that made them a little bit unusual. I think I might have another picture here. Yeah, that's an X-ray of one of the heads. And you'll see other pictures of the heads of some of these bodies. And it's clear that they don't have any teeth. That's one thing. The other thing that's clear is the capacity for holding a brain as a function and compared to the size of the body is pretty large. And like you'll see Maria a little later, and it was estimated that her cranial capacity was 20% greater than a human's. And Maria was about the same size as a human.
But they had the sort of the elongated skull, though.
Yeah, well, you can see that the head. You can see the back of the skull is kind of elongated, hooded. You could say even, and I think we'll see that too. This is looking at kind of inside the capacity of the skull, and where the arrows are pointing is assumed where the nerves would come down through that hole, like it would in most animals.
Yeah.
And then they were finally presented with two bodies. They had been given a previous body, but it looked so fake, and it turned out that it was more like a doll that had been assembled from bones. And so they once they saw the X-ray, they put it on the shelf and forgot about it. They were not interested in it. But these bodies, these two here, they were called Maria and Josefina and Alberto. Let me go back. Oops. Yeah. Alberto and Josefina. And so we'll look a little closer at them, but notice their necks, how long they are. Alberto's a little longer than Josefina's, at least at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And when they examined them real closer, it looked as though they could actually extend and retract their neck, kind of like a turtle. And if you saw E.T., I think it was E.T.
It looks like E.T.
Yeah, E.T. could do that. I don't know. Steven Spielberg must have known about this because I would never have thought to depict an alien with an extendable neck, but he did. And sure enough, they think these
maybe he had a little inside information or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, just looking at the bones and the structure of it, it looked like they could be extended. And the skin on these is very unusual. Some of the other images that I've seen, and I think I have one a little later here, but it reminds me when we have Thanksgiving, I'm usually the one that has to prepare the turkey and salt it down, and rubbing the skin. The skin looks a lot like a turkey skin to me, but a lot of people call it reptilian-like skin, but it's not human-looking skin anyway.
No, it's not.
Here's an X-ray now of those two bodies with their heads, because one of the bodies they got later on was without a head. But yes, their heads match kind of the ones that they were given earlier. And again, clearly they have no teeth, and they don't seem to have an ability to chew. And one of the first assumptions was that perhaps they lived on a liquid diet that they could take in through their small mouth.
Now, go back there a minute. Now, there's something there on Josefina that's down around the neck. That's
It happens to be a plate that's on her chest. We'll see that later.
Okay.
And that's an interesting topic because that plate is made out of metal, and it was whoever implanted it on her certainly had good surgical technology. And these bodies, by the way, were dated to have died approximately 1,000 years to 1,100 years ago. And did they have technology to do that kind of surgery back then? I don't know.
Certainly not according to our understanding today.
Yeah, that's right. And here we're looking down into the vault, if you will, where the brain would be. And it's in the center, more or less.
Hmm.
So here's a picture that points out a lot of the things that you were looking at.
Yeah.
The extendable neck, you can see that. They have this is a picture of Josephina, and it turns out Josephina is female, and she has eggs, and you can see 3 very quickly, but a more detailed analysis shows there's still another 4th egg that's in the fallopian tube, and so basically she has 4 eggs there that she's working on. The metal plate that you talked about, Jim, is in her chest, and you can see on the side. You can see it on the side view too. The other thing that's interesting about these guys is their bone structure. They only have a single bone in their forearms and 4 legs, like we have two bones, in our forearm. They only have 1, and so that makes them unique. The bones are hollow too. That's another thing that sets them apart from most animals that we have. They only had 11 vertebrae, and the thoracic cage is, you can see that you look at it from the side view, you say, well, how can they have any internal organs in there? There's no space for it. And
right,
and
yeah.
Yeah. Well, later on, you'll see that they don't. They're
Well,
very limited what's inside there.
Let me ask you this. The fact that there is eggs inside of that Josephina,
Yeah.
which would mean that she would not give live birth, and that she would not be a mammal.
Right.
She
That's
would
right.
be
Definitely.
a reptile or bird-like or something.
Yeah. Here we see a picture of a frog. I put this one here just to point out how similar those small bodies, and one we're talking about now is the small one. You haven't seen the big one yet, but the small bodies are about 2 feet tall, and they appear to be very frog-like. I mean, from the point of view of the fact that their skin, the fact that they're not mammals, and their bone structure is similar to a frog.
Wow.
However, the DNA that they've done, they've never been able to match any of the DNA of that species to anything in the database. It doesn't match frogs, turtles, people, alligators, sunflowers, wheat, or anything. No match at all to anything that they have.
This seems to be a new species of some sort.
Yeah, definitely not a normal species on planet Earth.
Yeah.
I happen to think they're not from this planet anyway, but we'll get to that later,
well,
I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that's an option, isn't it?
It is. And I think many of the people down there in Peru also think that they're aliens. They're not, from this planet. So I'm not alone there. Now here's a computer tomography image of this. Has to be Josephina because there's the eggs, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look closely, you can't make out too much as far as what's inside in terms of organs. And other images that have been taken of this do not reveal any evidence of a heart, lungs, or even a digestive system. And so that's perplexing, because how do they survive? I guess that would be a question. And let me see. I gotta look and see what my next slide here. Oh, well, before I get to that, here's a family of more bodies that were presented. But before I leave this one, I want to say what my take on this. In my research over the years, in reading both stories of people who were abducted and what they experienced, mostly that, and mm-hmm. I can't even point to when in my readings, because I've been doing this for at least 3 decades. Someplace along the line, I had heard or read by someone who apparently was with what they call gray. I call these the grays. That they don't eat, that they immerse themselves in a fluid, and they take in their energy, you might call it, or nutrients, transdermally through their skin. And
Oh,
so, so I think
that's
that
amazing.
that's what we're looking at here is a species that does not eat but absorbs through their skin. And that forced me to do some research into frogs because they do resemble frogs to a lot of extent. And I only recently learned that frogs can breathe underwater in the sense that they transpire. They can take in oxygen through their skin and expel carbon dioxide through their skin. So when they're below the ice in the wintertime, maybe buried in mud or something, hibernating, you might say, they can still absorb oxygen through their skin. And I think that's what these guys do, but they also take in nutrients and through their skin. And I heard a story recently by someone that they had been talking to another person who they trusted, who used to work in Area S4, which some people may recognize that that's near Area 51.
Right. Yeah.
And that person, who was almost matter of fact, was explaining how they had received a living alien from a crash, apparently, and they had a dilemma because it didn't eat. It could not eat, had no way to eat. And so they were trying to figure out how to keep it alive. And so they came up with the idea of basically plastering the skin with a high protein, like peanut butter or something. I don't know. Maybe that's what it was. And that's how they kept it alive. So,
Wow.
so my bottom line is I believe these guys, they're certainly unique. It hasn't been proven that they're alien, although they don't match anything on our Earth. And that I believe that they do take in everything they need transdermally.
Transdermally.
Yes.
I have heard that before regarding with other people who have experienced episodes and with so-called grays, and they said that they said the same thing about the grays, that they don't eat, they don't drink, everything is transdermally. So
yes,
that was something that over the years that I had been told.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I heard. In fact, in my novels, even though there's science fiction, I try to be as accurate as I can. I mentioned that where one of my characters was accidentally abducted, and he was given a tour, and as they were on the tour, a gray walked by, and so the human who had been abducted questions his abductor, who's a friend. In other words, he would almost answer any questions because he was going to erase the memory when they let the human go. But he was telling the human that no, they don't eat. They submerge themselves in a fluid.
It's kind of a good idea because you don't overeat that way, you know.
Yeah. So I don't know. When you think about these guys, what did they do running around Peru? Did they have access to peanut butter, or what did they do? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, those are things we think about, correct?
Yeah.
I just I'm amazed at this whole study. All these not mummies. These were living creatures at one time. Were living beings.
Yes.
With obviously they were intelligent, sentient beings just by the size of their brains. And
yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
This is amazing stuff.
I use these characters in my fourth novel, where they're actually taking care of a mothership, and they're grown.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would grow chickens. When I say grown, they're raised like chickens, but they're highly intelligent, and they run around and they take care of the ship, the mothership. And in fact, I even have them interconnected mentally to the mainframe of the computer, not by wire, but Wi-Fi, let's say. And so they all basically are locked together.
Yeah, well, Dr. Farrell, could this be the Greys? Could this be?
So. Yeah. In fact,
a species thereof. Yeah,
I think so. I'll show you a picture of the cover of my book, and I'll tell you that story. And they're Greys.
Yeah, we have to keep moving. We're down to.
Oh wow! Okay,
just about 20 minutes.
I was afraid I'd get done too fast here. So these are what they call the family, but they're the same species, and they assumed that the biology would be the same. And this is the tridactyl Victoria without a head, but same species.
Same species.
Yeah. And here is what these forensic graphic designer would say that they look like when they're walking
Well, that
around.
looks pretty much like a gray to me.
Yeah, well, I have to say I've never actually seen one, but
yeah.
But if you look, I think my next picture, yeah,
I've got a statue. I've got a statue of one right there behind me.
Oh, one of these? You got one of these
in the corner? You see back behind me there.
Oh, well, I got two of them up on mine. Yeah,
well, so this is all based on witness testimony and
yeah, exactly.
Over thousands of cases.
I had just finished writing this book, and I was working on the cover, and I was at a UFO conference when in the hallway somebody was selling these busts, and it came in a box. So I bought it one, took it home thinking I would digitize it and make my cover. But then I noticed the website was on the box, so I went on the website, and that is the website right there. So I immediately contacted the owner of who's actually the artist. And I asked him, I said, can I have permission to use this? And he said, sure. So I gave him a little money, and I have the rights to use this image. And I asked him, well, how did you come about that? And he said, well, I contacted about 12 people that he knew they had experience in contacting or seeing the Greys, either because they were abducted or for whatever. And so he asked them to send him a sketch of what he thought they thought they looked like. And then he took those 12 drawings and made 3 different composites to blend them all together, and then sent them out and asked them to vote. And this is the one that they selected as looking most like what they experienced. And amazingly, these guys, these bodies we just looked at, you could see that that's what they could look like, very close. So that was kind of amazing for me, because I did this cover back in 2004, long before they discovered these bodies. So here now we get to Maria.
Yeah,
Maria she's also a tridactyl, and bipedal, and very human looking. In fact, if she stood up, she'd be a little over 5 feet tall. She also had all of her organs almost. There were some that she lost because they believe she was attacked by a large cat in her buttocks. But other than that, and she also had about 20% more brain capacity, volume in the brain, in her skull anyway, for the brain. So she probably was maybe pretty intelligent. They dated her to have died about 1,750 years ago. No. And they use carbon dating for that. And if I have time, I'll talk more about that.
Yeah. When do we think the Nazca lines showed up?
That's dated at 1,700 years ago.
About that same time.
Yeah. So that is about the same time that supposedly she died. Now, I have a question about that, and we'll get to it hopefully in a minute or two, about the carbon dating process and how it may not even be valid for this particular situation.
Right.
But the DNA on her, though, does match about 25% human, but no modern human DNA, but human DNA in general. So
there was 25% after the testing. So this is something similar.
Yes.
But not similar. I mean,
yeah. No, the one thing, these guys are, I think their DNA would be considered ancient DNA by people who do DNA analysis, and it's I don't think that science is fully developed yet because there's a lot of question. But anyway, DNA does not last forever; it deteriorates for various reasons, and so therefore, when you're looking at something you might think is a couple thousand years old, there's certain skill involved in being able to remove what they call the ancient DNA and isolating the DNA that they really want to look at. So, and I don't know the process beyond that, but I just know that there's always a question about these things.
Right.
Now, Maria, these are slices done with the computer tomography, and they could clearly see that she had a heart and lungs and digestive system. And also the next slide, in her intestines, they discovered what looked like feces. And to me, that is one of the most important parts of this whole discovery, because they really need to carbon date that feces, because that feces probably lived its whole life, whatever it was, on Earth, and it would be valid to use carbon-14 dating methods on it. However, carbon-14 dating only works if you make the assumption that whatever you're dating spent its whole life on Earth. And I'm not going to make that assumption that Maria lived her whole life on Earth. So,
that's a good point too to think about.
Well,
I mean,
here's why. This is shows how carbon-14 is created, and it's created in the upper atmosphere by high energy particles, mostly probably from our sun. And when these high energy particles strike nitrogen 14, which is, like our atmosphere is at least 80% nitrogen, then it converts that to carbon 14, which is radioactive. And that means it has a half-life of about 5,730 years. And so this carbon 14, will settle down and mix with the atmosphere below. And you'll have a certain ratio between carbon 14 and carbon 12. And they know that ratio, and it varies a little bit from place to place and even from time to time, but they have good records on that. So once you're trying to do a carbon dating, you can refer to that table and, adjust your data. But the thing is, if Maria had not lived on Earth all her life, maybe she lived someplace where this process for creating carbon-14 did not exist. Either there was not a lot of nitrogen or not a lot of radiation, maybe where she lived. And so she wouldn't have that much carbon-14 to begin with, even if maybe none. Maybe all the carbon-14 she got was for the few years that she might have actually been on Earth. And therefore, her ratio of carbon-14 to 12 would be lower. And when you do the carbon-14 dating to her, you might come to the conclusion that she's older than she really is. Now, what really makes this interesting is in the same area where they found Maria, they found a baby Wawita, they called it. I'm not sure. I think I have a slide there. Well, that's her. Later on, I'll show you Wawita. It's a baby that was found near Maria. And Wawita also was initially looked like it was tridactyl, but they found out later that the baby originally had 5 digits, and 2 had been removed to make it look like tridactyl. Now, I'm not sure why that would have happened, but that's the way it was. And that baby was dated to have died 670 years ago. Now, the baby was less than a year old, so I think that would have been an accurate dating. Now, what if they happened to do a carbon dating of the feces in Maria and find out that actually Maria died 670 years ago? Then that could connect the Wawita, who they initially thought was her baby, and maybe this would show that the baby really was hers, and that Maria only did not die 1,700 years ago, only died 670 years ago. And so it may be that by comparing the skin dating of her, which dated to 1,700 or so, with skin and other tissue taken from her, to the true age of her, 670, you could perhaps even calculate when she might have arrived on this planet. That's my theory anyway.
Right.
Here's looking inside of her, and she really does have almost all of her organs, except for like in her butt. That's where she was bitten, and she died. They think that's what caused her death. She bled to death.
Oh.
This is her. She does have teeth. Okay. I don't see canines necessarily indicating that she might be a meat eater, but she does have teeth. And maybe someone who knows more about that could look at those teeth and say, no, she was a herbivore. They
look like a normal hominid herbivore.
She got molars and everything.
Yeah,
I don't know what happened. She maybe should have seen her dentist, because it looks like she lost some of her teeth. But
now you say that her cranial cavity is larger than the normal.
Yes.
What about the eye socket?
They're bigger. The eye socket is bigger, and I'll show you another picture that's done by the forensic artist
Yeah.
in a minute. But she had holes for her ears where we would have holes, but there are no, what do we call these things that stick out? She didn't have any of those.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. You'll see that. There we go. You can see. I don't know if is my cursor showing up on the screen?
Your cursor's not showing up. No.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, if you look at the side view of her head, you can see there are holes there for her.
Can you see my cursor? Probably not.
No, I cannot.
But I see the small hole on the side of her head there.
Right, and her eyes were a little large too.
Yeah.
Compared to us, larger than ours. Otherwise, on the other image that you can see where she's standing up, except for her toes look awful long, and so do her hands hanging down there. But if she didn't show her hands and feet and walked around and maybe wore a cap over her ears, you wouldn't really know that she's not human.
Well, and then we would have no way of knowing what sort of heightened sensory perceptions this person, this creature would have. Maybe she doesn't have the big ears,
right?
But maybe she has other ways of interpreting her environment. Who knows?
Yeah, I want to go back here a minute. I've been meaning to take a close look at this or ask somebody, because does she have vocal cords? She has lungs.
Oh, yeah. Well,
does she have vocal cords? Can she speak? And that I don't know. That's on my bucket list then, to find out more about this person.
That's a good one, Bob. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that when I saw this earlier. Huh. Yeah, you're right.
And in the skull cavity there, you can see something that looks like it was left over of her brain.
Yeah, there's a substance in there.
If you study it closely, it's a dehydrated brain, I think.
Dehydrated brain.
It doesn't certainly fill out the whole cavity, which it probably did originally. But now, like I said, at the very beginning of this whole research, the team, the effort really was to show that these bodies were not assembled. And clearly these images, they didn't have these to begin with. They had some other ones, x-rays and things. But clearly these computer tomography images show without a doubt that these bones were not assembled, that they're connected with connective tissue. Huh. And I didn't mention it earlier, but on this other species, the short guys that are 2 feet long, their joints, where we would have a ball and socket joint, there's a connective tissue there that's kind of like a sponge. So it can bend in more dimensions than, we have like 1 degree of freedom as we move our own arm back and forth. Right. But we can't, other than twisting the whole arm, you can't really go sideways. And I think the small species probably had a little more mobility in their joints than we might, because they weren't, it wasn't a ball and socket joint. It was a kind of a spongy type material.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Farrell, we're down to about 3 or 4 minutes here.
Okay.
What
there's Marita.
There's the baby. Yeah.
Yes. And I think, like I said, I think the top of the list that if I were to talk to those guys down in Peru who are doing this research, I said, whatever you do, if you don't do anything else, carbon date the feces in Maria, because that will tell you a lot. Oh, here I am. That is Maria in the back. Now, she's much bigger than that in real life, but I'm in a hallway looking through a window into a room, and she's in a box in that room, which I was told is filled with argon gas. So she's preserved, because that's one of the big concerns, is that the bodies will degrade with time.
Wow.
There's my books.
There's your books.
So we timed it right.
We sure did. And you've done a lot of research over the years. I know we had you present, I believe it was the science behind Noah's flood at the Phoenix MUFON meeting 2, 3, 4 years ago.
I think it was. I'm not sure though. I'd have to look at my records.
I can tell the listening audience that the book that I have here, that right here, and that's the science behind the alien encounters. I love the science behind series, Bob.
Thank you.
This is exactly the kind of stuff we're all. No, let me ask you this.
I lost you there for a minute.
Yeah,
Now,
Bob, would you be willing to come back and talk to us a second time?
sure.
Okay, and then because there's so many fascinating topics that we could talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, we're out of time, and I think it's been great that you were able to get on with us. I look forward to talking to you again, and of course, we both live here in the same area, so I will definitely see you again. So I want to thank you, Bob, for joining us, and I want to also thank my program manager, Patricia Wilkinson.
Yes.
For doing what she does behind the scenes. And I want to thank all of our viewers. I hope you enjoy our program. And thank you, KGRA Digital Broadcasting. And I have to say that this is Dark Window. I am Jim Mann, your host, along with Dr. Robert Farrell. And thank you for joining us, and good night.
Good night.